Okay, welcome to Sprint 118 review. I'll go over the Sprint statistics. I will also go over the community update, Preet on the UI, Adam on providers, Drew on Automate, Joe on platform, Alberto on API, and Starbug on documentation. So we had 318 PRs merged for this past 2 weeks, and we had a lot more PRs merged in the integration tests as well as ManageIQ. And again, this shows the PRs merged as well as PRs opened and PRs that still remain open. Merged, opened, still open. There we go. And here's the PRs by label. So we had a lot of PRs, bugs that were merged, as well as the total for all the other labels. And for the health report, there wasn't much change here, but there was some improvements on UI service and overt providers. And for the community update, so we had the Hammer 10 released, and also the Ivanchuk Beta 2 released. And the name of the J release was Vlastimil Jansa was chosen. And over to Harpreet.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Total of 109 PRs merged in all of the UI repos this sprint. Out of that, there were 7 enhancements and 47 bug fixes, and so on. I'll go over some of the main highlights of enhancements and bugs. So for enhancements, that ownership support was added for key pairs to address the issue where some of the user roles didn't have visibility to key pairs, and also when viewing key pairs through provider relationship, it was showing all of the key pairs regardless of logged in user's role. An ID of service record was added on service details screen to help distinguish between services with same name. Until now, firmware registry pages were read-only, so basic add, edit, delete, and refresh operations were added for those. In Configuration Explorer, support was added to be able to queue up one or more schedules to run now. And service ownership component was updated to use API to get data for the form and also to save the ownership details. And finally, some changes to saved report screen that I have screenshots for. So next slide, please. Okay, so a saved report screen that has been updated in last few sprints to add sorting, searching, filtering, etc. This sprint feature was added to be able to clear the applied filters by one click from the saved report screen, similar to how we have on the V2V screens. And when there are no records, no grid, no paginator is displayed, instead an empty state component with a message will be displayed. So you can see that on these 2 screenshots here. Next slide, please. And for the bugs, in Dialog Editor, a bug was fixed to force user to select a tag category when tag control was selected. And an issue was fixed with datetime control inconsistencies between Dialog Editor and when running the actual dialog. And a couple of issues fixed when running a custom button with a dialog for generic objects and network providers to redirect to correct screen when submit or cancel buttons were pressed. In Service UI, an issue was fixed where custom button display was not honoring the display for field values that were set when adding the custom button. When it was set to be displayed on list view, it was not showing up on the list view and instead on the details view. So that got fixed. And since we did breadcrumbs in this release, the whole breadcrumbs were redone. So there were some inconsistencies and breadcrumbs were missing on some of the screens. So there are several PRs around that. And just a note that prior to this whole redoing of breadcrumbs, there were no breadcrumbs on the Explorer style screens. So some of these BZs were related to breadcrumbs being missing on those or not displayed correctly. So you can click on that link and see all of the PRs that were merged to fix those. And there was several PRs around the trees cleanup and technical debt work going on in trees. So the next link is for the list of PRs for the trees work that's ongoing. A bug was fixed to hide the additional tenants tree on the catalog item editor and the details screen if the user role didn't have the access to tenants feature. And finally, a bug was fixed to allow tagging of floating IPs when going through cloud network or network provider relationships. And that's all I have for today. On to Adam.
Thanks, Harpreet. So mercifully, there's only one slide for providers, so we're not going to take up half the sprint review like last sprint. On the core side, we added a method to EMS folder that helps determine if a folder can hold VMs. This is what used to be called blue folder. This is logic which is very VMware specific, and we made it more generic so that we can move some of that logic out of the UI. We fixed a bug where pausing a provider that was already paused made it so that you could never resume it again. Basically, it just wasn't checking if it was already paused, so we paused it. And since there was no UI graying out of the button, it was very easy to just hit pause twice and get into the situation. We added a method to VM remove all snapshots so that you could request it over the queue, so that you don't have to actually block and wait for it to finish, which was a great addition by Fabian. On the OpenStack side, they fixed a targeted refresh issue when it was triggered by events for a security group. They also allowed disabling events, reading back previous events by setting the back read seconds to 0. On the VMware side, we now honor the scheduled full refresh setting when streaming refresh was enabled. Previously, it would just constantly pull for updates and wouldn't actually do a full refresh based on the settings. We no longer collect if a VM is a linked clone on VMware. It was a feature that was added a long time ago, and it's not entirely sure if it was broken by VMware somewhere in the middle. There's no actual attribute that a VM is a linked clone, so there was some logic there that was kind of convoluted, and it turned out to just incorrectly say that all VMs were linked clones. So we just stopped collecting it because it was inaccurate. Let's see, we simplified the logic in the refresh worker for streaming refresh. Before, there was some specific thread logic in there that is now encapsulated under the streaming refresh class, so that kind of keeps the logic compartmentalized there. And we also now collect storage profiles during full refreshes if you have streaming refresh enabled. Storage profiles come from another SDK in VMware, and so they're not actually part of the wait for updates API call, which is why they weren't there before. And on the overt side, Lattice fixed a bug where a targeted VM refresh was failing if a VM didn't have a host assigned yet. This isn't something that's common in overt. It was actually found because the V2V migration was going through a different API to create the VM, and it was possible to create the VM before the host was assigned, and so this was causing bugs there. So we fixed that up. That's it for providers.
Thanks, Adam. So requests of a new initiated by column, which replaces what used to be kind of a yucky string-based differentiator between what was scheduled retirement and user-started retirement. Lucy also added a new EVM get state vars method, which gets all state variables without having to know their names. Move into folder. You can now use on the engine. Lucy had originally implemented it on the back end. And Pete made some changes to let us run the automate role on RHEL 8 with Python 3. On to refactors. So we had a PR that Nick L did that introduces a number of improvements to the Vert workflow for allowed templates. And specifically, it's beneficial to environments that have EMSs with lots of templates. Specifically, I think Amazon is one of these. Yes. Fabian fixed a bug where the object comparison fails on service objects because the instances may have the same ID but may be different objects in RSpec. And because I never get to talk about code changes that are made by Greg, he simplified an equality check inside of the MIQ hash struct. Martin P, I think, am I on the next slide? Yes. Could you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. So Martin P has put in a whole bunch of work recently to let us open URLs from Automate. So the open URL feature can now support a bunch of other object types. Oh, I'm going out of order. Sorry, those are the two at the end. Fabian did a bunch of stuff in the last couple of weeks around transformation, Ansible Lunch, Ansible playbooks as a service, and infra conversion jobs. And so we have a check on the IP address that's on the presence of the IP address inside of Lunch playbook as a service. And it also does some set retries. We can also now create a policy that contains the event VM retire request. So creating that policy does not, we had some issues with preventing VM retirement, so we now do a policy check before make request and retirement. And display is a column in the services table, but kernel also has a display method. So when you run an automation inline method, service display would call the kernel method instead of getting the value from the table column. So we're now undefining the object display, which is going to not be called anymore over service display. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. So in the platform space, 22 PRs were merged to Sprint. Vibor contributed an enhancement to remove unwanted strings from the import-export schedules tool. Yuri made an enhancement that allows unneeded schedules to be disabled. And Brandon made one to broadcast to the container logger the CloudWatch messages. The built-in MIQ LDAP client is being deprecated in favor of external auth. I added an enhancement to log a deprecation warning to the audit logger when MIQ client is used for authentication. And that goes to the MIQ audit log, not the system audit log. Next slide, please. For bugs, Brandon plugged a leak where MIQ event was undefined for the DB backup, which is run from the appliance console. And Keenan fixed a bug that caused sorting to be off and also impacted performance with the new turbo button. Nick C fixed an issue with standby database disconfiguration by fixing the SE Linux context for the standby database directory. Joe R fixed a DB migration blocker bug. And he did this by wrapping each of the migrations with a clear of the schema cache. And here he fixed a few bugs, a couple of typos in reports. He changed MIQ search C to destroy defunct searches. Addressed an issue where chargeback reports overloaded the queue by making the generation region aware and service and avoid generation retired services. And he fixed failed validations when a schedule exists but is not linked to a corresponding widget. Last slide, please. Team Nick and Nick were very busy on the embedded Ansible front. Nick C made a couple of PRs to fix a bug where the advanced configuration embedded Ansible proxy value for SCM connection was not used. And he fixed a bug where the AWS playbooks failed. And he did this by running the Ansible runner with the Python path set, which allowed pulling in additional modules. Nick L fixed an issue where the output from some playbooks was not parsed correctly. He made a fix to ensure API authentication tokens weren't being logged. He addressed a bug where playbooks and subfolders weren't being found. And he also made an enhancement to broadcast the deletion of removed repo directories. And finally, he addressed an issue where git clone was not process safe by using multi-process file locking for git actions. And that's it for the platform space. On to Alberto.
Thanks, Joe. So for the API, we have a new enhancement that came in this sprint by Miha. This is where we added the firmware registries endpoint collection. So this was needed by the UI to update that page to do full create, query, remove, and all that fun stuff, including a resync of the firmware registry. So as you can see here, the endpoints, the first one for the creation, following by the queries, getting the collection or an individual resource, the deletes, and then followed by the sync FW binaries action on a resource. And that's it for the API.
Hi everyone. There were 8 PRs merged in this sprint, of which 5 were bugs and 3 announcements. we've added content on the integration with Red Hat Cloud Services and provider synchronization in the Managing Providers Guide. We've also updated the new menu options in the UI and other improvements. Just the new config button and getting the overview. There's a few other menu options to reflect in the general config guide. And we've also removed the content on RSS and overview timelines from the general config and monitoring alerts and monitoring alerts guide. There's more to come, but that's it in the sprint. Thank you.
Okay, that ends Sprint 118 review. The next Sprint review is on September 4th, with August being over, sadly. So we'll see you then. Bonfire.